some of the prisoners. Maybe it was the sanctity of the cell.
How could I go home and say to my wife, well, about the same time as you were getting up this morning, I was cutting down someone who had hung himself?
Let's do a big totem pole. Big fucking totem pole. Oak, the whole business and all that stuff. Wood carving equipment and all that sort of stuff.
Put my hands over my head like this because there was so much shooting going on. I didn't want to be shot.
You'll notice if you take a look down there that there's a metal plate. Can you see the metal plate there? Now, these are the pipes. Do you see the metal plate? That metal plate in there that has been, that's welded or riveted into the wall. Now, the reason for that was that prior to the plate going up and while on the blanket and on punishment, the boys got plastic knives and dug out the cement round the pipes, and then they would send through notes and tobacco and messages to one another. And they used to, it was one of the great values that we got from the Bible, which every prisoner, God bless the British system, but every prisoner has to have a Bible, and they couldn't prevent us having a Bible. They don't have to feed you, but they have to give you a Bible. And we got the Bible, and you take a long strip off the Bible and you'd flatten it out and you'd put a sprinkling of tobacco. If we could get tobacco, we'd get a sprinkling of tobacco, roll it up and push it through. Or you'd even push a light through on a wick. And how you made a wick was, we had any piece of cotton towel we could get, and you took the string out of the towel and you unloosened it and made it into a wick. And then we used to use we would smuggle in a flint from a lighter and a small piece, the tube of a biro, the inside of the biro where the ink runs, piece of that, and put the wick or the flint into the top of that. Make a wee bit of cotton, set it down on the floor, and then get either a wheel from a lighter. You just took the wheel out of the lighter, you didn't get either the wheel or a piece of a razor blade, the tiniest wee piece of a razor blade, as long as you get a spark. Get the spark. Flick, 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 until that would light up. And once that lit up, then you put your wick into it and got the wick lit, and you had a wee spark. And I seen them coming right down from cell 2, right to the bottom, down the wing. And Ben would have been smoking just a sprinkling of tobacco.
Setting up a circus school in Sarajevo at the time, and I was come back to go to this interview, and the interview was 3 people, the great and good of Belfast, give me the rundown, what I've done, blah, blah, blah. But it wasn't until I came into the cache that I really knew what an interview was about, because I was asked to come over to see all the army councils, the 5 participating army councils of the cache. And this was just such a fun thing, because there it was, I talk about sphincter tightening times. what was I arguing for? I had no idea. But I walked into a double cell like this and all the chairs are around, you know. And I was asked to sit here as soon as I came in the door. So I just sat down thinking, I wonder what's going to happen here. And 8 blokes came in. Well, wasn't it the OC? There's the Minister for Culture, here's the Minister for Education, here's the Minister for Jail Talk, here's the Minister for Sport, here's the Minister for such and such, here's the Minister for the Interior, here's the Minister for the Escape Committee, here's the Minister for this. It was the entire IRA Republican movement's managing council of the prison. And I thought I already got the job. These boys were here to find out what I was going to do with the money that I had, which was to promote arts in prison. Well, it was nothing ordinary. They all had shorts on, and I'm sitting here, you know, with a jacket. You know, didn't have the tie on at that particular stage, but thought well, and all these blokes in shorts, and they're all tugging and they're forelocked to each other about their particular jobs. Well, how are we going to spend the money in sport? How are we going to spend the money with, you know, teaching Gaelic? How are we going to spend the money in art? How are we going to spend the money in education? And then the OC turns to me and said, listen, Mike, he said, how much money do you get? And I said, well, you know, your information is probably better than mine, you know. You tell me. At the moment, I think I've got around about 50 grand per annum to work in 4 prisons. And he went, right. Currently serving at this particular time, there are 50% or 60% of the population are nationalist, Catholic, Republican. So I tell you what, Mike, why don't you just give us that 60% and we'll allocate it. I never had so much balderdash in all my life. It was just sort of like, why not? The Protestants don't use the stuff anyway. Them loyalist boys sit on their fucking asses all the time. No, you just give it straight over to us. And it was this great conversation that went in there. It was this about who does more work, who's more needy of this money than anybody else. It was brilliant. I'd never had a... And then I moved from here and I had to go and do the INLA. The same thing happened over there. The UDA, the LVF and the UVF, to a lesser degree it happened. They all wanted to make the case, give us the lump sum, we'll look after it, buddy. You know, that's fine. It's just amazing. I just remember my first time in the maze in such a way that 8 blokes, minister for everything you want under the sun, sitting around having an interview for me about my job and my money. Lovely. Just works so well.
The only other prison I'd ever been inside was Exeter Jail in Devon in England, where I was a student, and I was a student journalist, and I wanted to write about the prison, so I went in to Exeter Jail. This was totally different to that jail. That jail was a huge, great, booming, on several stories, and there was, you know, there was staircases and wires to stop people throwing themselves off and killing themselves, and it was very, very old, you know, which in its own way was very depressing and gloomy and dismal. But this place somehow had a special gloominess and a misery about it because it was so anodyne. There wasn't anything architecturally interesting about it at all. It was just purely utilitarian and functional, and one had the sense of the vitality of the prisoners and the dead hand of the system and the concrete and the physical greyness of the place, and which was incarcerating them.
I've only ever really ran into one guy who was on the dirty protest at the time. It was in the RVH. I was down with my wife, and I won't mention his name because he's a family man actually. He wouldn't thank me for doing it. But we were sitting talking, funny enough, with a cup of coffee each, and we're talking about the times, and we're talking about the dirty protest basically, and the hunger strike and things like that. And I thought, my goodness, isn't it strange that we were on either side of the door and here we are talking like neighbours? You know, it was quite odd. And then my wife came out and we introduced each other basically. And I never said basically where we had met. And we drove home and she said, "Is that an old friend of yours?" And I said, "Yes, he is. I've known him for years and he seems a nice fella." He says, "Yeah." He says, "Yeah, he lives in West Belfast. He's got 3 kids." And I was driving up the road and I smiled to myself. I thought, you know, doesn't that just sum it up? That's what it's really all about. And it's nice to meet people outside now, and maybe we've all matured and grown just that bit older.
So when we were making the documentary, we'd come into the prison, come into the blocks, talk to the prisoners, do some filming, and then part of the deal was at the end of the day we'd have what they called wash up with the prison governor, who was Bill Trasdell at the time, who was really good governor and sort of supportive of what we were doing, but obviously quite anxious about what we did and what we showed. And the agreement that we reached with the Northern Ireland office is that we could film anything in the prison as long as it didn't jeopardize security. And we, of course, were happy to abide by that. And I remember coming back at the end of one day, talking to Bill in his governor's office over a cup of tea from a china cup. And he said, "Okay, what have you been doing today, Peter?" And Steve Hewlett, my producer, who would have been with me. And I said, "Oh, we've been in the Loyalist wings just like this. This is a Loyalist wing, and we saw the band." And the governor said, "Band? What band?" And I said, "The band in H, whatever number H block it was. It wasn't actually this particular one, but it was one that was identical to this." He said, "But there aren't any bands." And I said, "Well, I'm afraid there are. There's a band in H, whatever it is. And they're practicing, he said. "What with?" And I said, "Well, they've got instruments." He said, "But they're not allowed instruments." I said, "Well, they've got them. They've made them. They've made drums out of water containers and kitchen utensils, and they've made drumsticks, and they've made uniforms." He said, "Uniforms? But uniforms aren't allowed in the prison." And I said, "Well, they've made them. They've made them out of paper and whatever they can lay their hands on, and they're going to march up and down because it was the 300th anniversary of the Battle of the Boyne, and they're going to mark it by marching up and down the wing in their full regalia." By this time, Bill's face had gone ashen. He produced a book of prison rules and said, "But look, it says, no uniforms, no instruments." And I said, "Well, sorry, Bill, but that's what's happening in one of your wings, and they're going to do it, and we'd like to film it." He said, "But you can't film that." And I said, "Well, why not? It's happening. We're not setting it up. I just came across it. And they're happy to be filmed." Surprise, surprise. And he didn't say it's more than my job's worth, because he wasn't like that. But he was clearly quite concerned. And he said, I said, "Well, if you don't let us film it, when we finish the documentary and people say, 'Yes, but what were you not allowed to film?' I will have to say the sequence with the Loyalist band and tell them about it. And the credibility of making this film and the credibility of the Prisons Department of the Northern Ireland office is that we were given total, free, unfettered access, which astonishingly we were." He said, "Well, can you go back to them and can you ask them not to wear the uniforms if they just march up and down in their t-shirts and shorts and tracksuits and stuff?" And I said, "Well, I'll try, Bill, but don't hold your breath. So I went back into the wing and talked to the OC of the wing and some of his mates, and said, they said, are you going to be filming us? Because they wanted to be filmed, obviously, to show all their loved ones and their comrades out there what they were doing and celebrating this, the single most important anniversary in the Protestant calendar. And I said, yep, we can film you, but the governor has asked me to ask you, if you wouldn't do it in the uniforms, just do it in your tracksuits and shorts and t-shirts. To which they said, Peter, you've got to be joking. So to cut a long story short, we filmed the band, and the arrangement was that we had agreed to show the final programme to the Prisons Department, the Northern Ireland office, as a courtesy. We didn't normally do this, but it was to make sure that no security in the prison had been jeopardised by our showing something that shouldn't have been shown, da 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 da. So that's when they saw the sequence of the Loyalist band. I remember sitting round, and John Steele was the director of prisons at the time, great guy, and it was John who was our champion, my champion, in granting us access to the prison. And they all sat round and watched the film. And when the band came on, the wonderful sequence, you could hear the intakes of breath around the room. And not a word was said. And at the end, there was silence. And then John Steele said, okay, before you tell me what you think, I'll tell you what I think. And I think it's an accurate and true representation of life inside the maze. And then they all agreed because the boss had said so. But it was one of the things that I'll always remember. And the Loyalists thought it was fantastic, and Loyalists and Protestants outside thought it was great that they were carrying on the tradition which had brought many of them to this place anyway. And of course the IRA prisoners thought it was hysterically funny, they just fell about. But that was in a wing just like this.